Every week, someone walks into my clinic with a pair of hearing aids that they've basically given up on. They're frustrated, their spouse is frustrated, and they say some version of the same thing. I guess the hearing aids just don't work for me. And honestly, I hate hearing that because most of the time, the hearing aids weren't the problem. The problem was how they were bought, how they were fit, and whether anyone actually verified that the hearing aids were working for the patient's specific ears. Hearing aids aren't like buying a TV. You can't compare brands, find the best price, and expect a good result when you get home. This is healthcare. This is your ability to follow a conversation at dinner, hear your grandkids, stay engaged at work, and stop pretending that you understood something that you really didn't. When the process fails, people end up with what feels like very expensive paperweights, and they blame themselves.
If you're navigating hearing loss or struggling with ringing in your ears, then you've come to the right place. The All Ears Hearing and Tinnitus podcast is your go-to source for expert insights, real stories, and cutting-edge solutions in hearing health. We'll dive into the latest advancements in hearing healthcare, explore groundbreaking treatments for tinnitus, and offer practical tips for better hearing. Here to help you tune into a world of better hearing, here's your host from Timpanogos Hearing and Tinnitus, Dr. Layne Garrett.
I'm Dr. Layne Garrett, founder of Timpanogos Hearing and Tinnitus here in Utah, and I've been treating patients with hearing loss for over 20 years. Today, I'm going to walk you through the 3 mistakes I see all the time, so you don't become one of those patients sitting across from me wondering what went wrong. Mistake number 1, making a decision based on price. And I want to be careful here because this is more nuanced than it sounds. Shopping for a better price isn't wrong. Hearing aids are expensive and rarely covered by insurance. But when price becomes the primary filter, when you're comparing clinics purely on sticker cost, you're measuring the wrong thing entirely. A randomized control trial out of Indiana University put this directly to the test. Researchers gave them the same high-end hearing aids to patients under 2 different service conditions. The group that went through full audiology best practices through fitting, real ear verification, counseling, follow-up came out significantly more satisfied and more likely to keep wearing their hearing aids. The group that was more self-directed, meaningfully lower satisfaction and far less likely to continue. Price alone didn't predict success. The quality of the fitting and follow-up did. Price tells you what the hearing aids cost. It tells you almost nothing about how well you'll actually hear. But maybe you're thinking, I did my research, I compared hearing aids, I found a solid clinic, and I made a reasonable decision. Did you though, or did you find a reasonable price? Think about how the process actually went. You searched online, you saw prices all over the map for what looked like the same hearing aid. You picked something that felt safe, not cheap, but not super expensive either. You told yourself, these are all basically the same, right? And now you're still turning up the TV, still asking people to repeat themselves at dinner, and still nodding through conversations you're not fully tracking with. You figured the hearing aids just maybe needed more time. But what if the problem isn't the hearing aids? What if no one ever verified they were actually set up right for your ears? That's not a hearing aid problem. That's a fitting problem, and it's very fixable. So what should you actually be evaluating? Here's where most clinics fail. They skip real ear measurement. This is a procedure where we put a little tiny microphone inside your ear canal with the hearing aids in as well and measure what's reaching your eardrum, not what the manufacturer's software predicts should be there. Every ear canal is shaped differently. The hearing aid software prediction is a starting point. The measurement is the reality. Without it, your hearing aids can be off by 10, 15, or even 20 decibels at certain pitches. You'd never know that, but you'd feel it every day. A survey in Hearing Review found that only about 34% of audiologists routinely perform real ear measurements. The American Academy of Audiology and the American Speech Language Hearing Association all say that's the standard of care, and most clinics aren't doing it. Some of the worst fitted hearing aids I've ever seen came out of very expensive clinics, and some of the best outcomes I've seen came from patients who didn't have the best premium hearing aids, but who had a precise, verified, consistent follow-up. The question to ask any clinic before you book: do you perform real ear measurements on every fitting? If they hesitate or say, oh, it's optional, that tells you what you need to know. Mistake number 2, assuming your clinic was doing a thorough evaluation. And honestly, this one isn't your fault either. You walked into a professional's office. You assumed they had a complete process in place. And that's honestly a reasonable thing to assume. The problem is what most clinics actually do. They do a standard audiogram, the beep test, which tells them your threshold of hearing, meaning the softest you can hear in a quiet room. Then they test your speech understanding also when quiet, and then they make a recommendation and start talking about hearing aids. That's it. That's the typical workup at most clinics. So what's missing here? Well, first, tympanometry to check the middle ear function. Then there's otoacoustic emission testing to see how well the little nerve endings in your cochlea are actually performing. And then speech and noise testing, which in my opinion is the most important test we can do, because your ability to understand someone across from you in a noisy restaurant has absolutely nothing to do with hearing beeps in a soundproof booth. Those aren't exotic tests, and they're not experimental. They're just not standard practice at most clinics because they take more time and they require someone who's actually looking at the full picture of your hearing system, not just enough information to justify a hearing aid recommendation. And if tinnitus is part of your experience, which it is for many people with hearing loss, a surface level evaluation misses that completely. A fitting strategy appropriate for someone without tinnitus can be the wrong call for someone with an auditory system that already is hyperactive and compensating. And again, you didn't do anything wrong by trusting the professional, but now you know the process at most clinics is not complete. So ask the audiologist what is actually included in the testing before you sit down in that booth. And then mistake number 3, and this one has the longest tail, treating hearing aids as a purchase instead of beginning of treatment. People buy hearing aids the way they buy glasses. They get tested, get a prescription, pick out frames, done. Either they work or they don't. But hearing aids don't work that way. And this is part of the conversation that many clinics skip entirely. Hearing loss is a chronic progressive condition. Your hearing today is not what it was like 5 years ago, and it's not what it's going to be 5 years from now. Your brain's ability to process and interpret sound needs active support, not a one-time purchase. The hearing aids are the tool. The treatment is the ongoing relationship. The 2024 Lancet Commission, one of the most respected bodies in global health research, identified hearing loss as the single largest modifiable risk factor for dementia in midlife, carrying a larger population attributable fraction than smoking, diabetes, or physical inactivity. But that association only holds when hearing loss is actually being managed. Hearing aids sitting in the drawer don't count. What that means practically, when you're choosing a clinic, you're not just choosing hearing aids. You're choosing what happens after you walk out the door. Does that clinic include follow-up appointments? Do they monitor your hearing regularly? Do they offer hearing rehabilitation, something like Lace AI, to help your brain relearn efficient sound processing? Do they have structured tinnitus management if that's part of your picture? If the answers are vague, you're buying a product. You're not receiving treatment. Now, I'm going to tell you about a patient I saw recently whose name was David. He bought a hearing aids at a big box retailer about a year before he came to see us. And they were decent hearing aids and they were priced reasonably. He wore them for a few weeks and struggled in restaurants and meetings and figured he just was someone that hearing aids couldn't help. And then he put them in the drawer. But his wife was frustrated. He was embarrassed, and he'd started to turn down dinners going with friends because noisy environments were just impossible. When we ran a quick speech and noise test, his speech and noise scores told us exactly why he was struggling. He needed to hear the speech significantly above the background noise just to follow a conversation. We fit him correctly with full real ear verification, adjusted the strategy based on his complete picture, and reran the test. The improvement was substantial. He went from constantly straining to actually participating in those noisy places. He told me afterwards, I didn't give up on hearing aids, I gave up on a bad fitting. Now that's the whole point. Before you buy hearing aids, ask any clinic these 3 questions. 1, do you perform real ear measurements on every fitting? 2, do you test speech understanding and background noise, not just how softly I can hear beeps in the booth? And 3rd, what does follow-up care look like? What's included after the hearing aids are bought? Those 3 questions will tell you more about the quality of care you're about to receive than any price comparison will. Because this isn't a purchase, it's a treatment. And the difference between those 2 things is the difference between hearing aids that change your life and hearing aids that end up in the drawer. Don't buy hearing aids, get treated. If you want to understand what a proper hearing evaluation actually looks like, what tests matter, and what to expect, we have a free learning center online with no pressure resources. You can find a link in the description. And if you're here in northern Utah, we'd be happy to sit down with you at one of our clinics along the Wasatch Front.
A world of better hearing and relief from tinnitus is within reach, and we're here to help. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast right now and join us on the journey to clearer sound and a richer life. Thanks for listening to the All Ears Hearing and Tinnitus podcast with Dr. Layne Garrett. We'll see you next time.